people of Madyan, a society built on deception. In the far stretches of the ancient Arabian lands, surrounded by rocky deserts and trade routes buzzing with caravans, lived a community known as the People of Madyan. At first sight, Madyan looked prosperous, markets overflowing, merchants negotiating, camels loaded with goods. But beneath that surface, something darker was quietly eating away at the heart of this society. Their wealth didn't grow from honesty, it grew from manipulation. In Madyan, cheating was normal, lying was casual, and fraud was considered business intelligence. Traders used two sets of scales, one for buying and one for selling. Customers were tricked, travelers were exploited, and poor workers were underpaid. The entire economy was built on deception, and the people proudly called it smart trade. And yet, this was only the beginning. The people had grown arrogant. Their comfort made them blind. Their success made them reckless. They laughed at the idea of accountability. They rejected the possibility of a higher authority watching their deeds. To them, power belonged to the wealthy, justice belonged to the influential, and truth had no place in the marketplace. Into this corrupted society, Allah sent a man Shu'aib, a prophet who wasn't an outsider. He was one of them. He knew their ways, their tricks, their excuses. He understood their system from the inside. But more importantly, he understood what honesty meant and what injustice could eventually destroy. Shu'aib watched his people with a heavy heart. Their markets echoed with lies. Their dealings lacked mercy. Their hearts lacked humility. Madyan was drowning in wealth but starving for integrity. And because he was from among them, Shu'aib didn't preach with arrogance. He spoke with compassion. He reminded them that blessings come from fairness, not fraud. He showed them that a society built on cheating eventually collapses under its own weight. But Madyan wasn't ready to listen. Their leaders loved the profit. Their businessmen loved the shortcuts. Their elites loved the system that made them powerful. So when Shu'aib stood in the market and called them to reform, they didn't hear a prophet, they heard a threat. This was the beginning of a clash between truth and corruption, justice and greed, honesty and manipulation. And Madyan had no idea how close they were to the edge of destruction. The economy of deception. How Madyan mastered fraud. The deeper you stepped into the markets of Madyan, the clearer it became that deception wasn't an accident, it was a system. Fraud wasn't a side effect of trade. It was the engine that powered their economy. The people of Madyan believed that cheating wasn't wrong. It was efficient. Every shop had two sets of weights. Every merchant had rehearsed lies ready for negotiation. Every deal came with hidden traps, and every handshake carried an unspoken warning: trust no one. Travelers passing through Madyan often left with lighter bags and heavier regrets. Local customers were treated like prey. Even the poor of the city, those who depended on daily wages, were exploited by wealthy traders who shaved off just enough payment to stay rich while keeping the laborers desperate. The corruption was so widespread that people didn't only indulge in fraud, they celebrated it. A merchant who outsmarted his customers was praised. A trader who manipulated scales was admired. The successful were not the honest. They were the most deceptive. But this moral downfall had a psychological effect. The people of Madyan began to believe that wealth was the ultimate proof of success, and success justified any method. They built their identity on profits without ethics, status without kindness, and wealth without gratitude. This is the society Shu'aib has faced. He watched men who prayed but cheated. He watched families who thanked God for wealth but refused to show mercy to the weak. They saw no contradiction in worshipping the Creator while destroying His creation through injustice. The leaders of Madyan were the worst. They manipulated the economy like puppeteers. They enforced systems that favored them and crushed anyone who tried to challenge their monopoly. In this environment, fairness wasn't weakness, it was dangerous. Anyone who attempted honesty was pushed out of business or mocked for being too soft. Shu'aib understood that corruption this deep was not merely a habit, it was a sickness. And if a society becomes sick, the disease spreads until it affects every household, every market, and every heart. He knew that change was needed, not just small adjustments, but a complete moral reset. Yet he also knew that when greed becomes a culture, truth becomes the enemy, and soon the people of Madyan were about to face that truth. The Prophet's call, rebuilding trade on truth. When the corruption of Madyan reached its peak, Shu'aib stepped forward with a message that shook the foundations of their economy. He didn't begin with threats or warnings. He began with something far softer, yet far more powerful, a call to honesty. Day after day, he stood in the marketplace, surrounded by merchants who had mastered the art of deception. The sound of coins clinking, the arguments over prices, the sly exchanges behind curtains, this was the background to his mission. But Shu'aib's voice carried clarity that cut through the noise. He told them, "Give full measure. Do not diminish others' rights. Do not spread corruption in the land." Simple words, clear words, words that could save them. He reminded them that wealth earned through cheating is not wealth, it's poison that destroys a society from the inside. He reminded them that blessings increase when honesty increases, and collapse begins when injustice becomes normal. For many, his message sparked something in their hearts. A few of the poor nodded with hope. Some travelers listened with respect. Even a handful of traders felt guilt rising inside them. But the majority, they didn't want change, because change meant losing the profits they loved. Shu'aib did not give up. He spoke about fairness as if he were describing sunlight, something pure, something essential, something missing in their world. He explained that success built on lies isn't success. It's a countdown to destruction. He explained that trade is not just business, it's a moral contract, a test of integrity. And he warned them that no society survives when it normalizes cheating. The cracks begin small, but soon the entire structure collapses. Still, he didn't speak only of consequences. He spoke of hope. He told them that if they returned to fairness, their blessings would return. Trade would flourish. Peace would return to their streets. Markets would be filled not only with goods, but with trust. But the elites of Madyan saw his words as a threat to their power. The wealthy saw his message as an attempt to weaken their control. To them, ethical trade meant losing the advantage they had built through manipulation. So while Shu'aib invited them toward reform, they quietly began preparing their resistance. The stage was set, truth had spoken, and corruption was about to retaliate. The elite's backlash when truth became a threat, as Shu'aib continued calling his people toward honesty, fairness, and ethical trade. The message began spreading faster than the leaders expected. His words weren't just sermons. They were awakening the conscience of ordinary people, laborers, travelers, small merchants, those who had suffered under the weight of the corrupt system. And that terrified the elites of Madyan. The wealthy merchants, the political chiefs, and the powerful financiers gathered in private meetings. They didn't see Shu'aib as a prophet. They saw him as a threat to their empire, a man whose words, if accepted, could dismantle the structures they had built through years of manipulation. Their resistance began with mockery. They laughed at him in public, rolling their eyes whenever he spoke about honesty. They said things like, "Oh look, here comes the preacher who wants us to become poor. Shu'aib, are you telling us your God wants us to stop making money?" The more he spoke, the louder their laughter became. But when mockery failed, they escalated to intimidation. They warned the people that following Shu'aib would destroy the marketplace. They spread rumors that he wanted to wipe out their economy. They claimed that he was mentally unstable, obsessed with some invisible threat of punishment. And when even that wasn't enough, the leaders confronted him directly. They stood before him in the marketplace and said, "We will not change our system just because of you. Your message is dangerous. Your teachings threaten our way of life." They accused him of dividing the community. They said he was interfering in matters beyond religion that he was trying to control. Business, politics, and economics. To them, faith belonged inside houses and prayer spaces. But fairness in trade? That touched their profits, and they couldn't allow that. Shu'aib, however, remained calm. He didn't argue with arrogance. He reminded them gently, "I seek nothing from you. I only guide you toward what will save you." But calmness only made them angrier. His persistence felt like defiance. His honesty felt like rebellion. His message felt like a threat to everything they had built. And so, the leaders of Madyan decided to move from resistance to direct opposition. They would silence him through pressure, threats, and schemes before his message spread beyond their control. The conflict between truth and greed had officially ignited. The dark plot, when fear turned into hostility. The leaders of Madyan had mocked, dismissed, and argued with Shu'aib, but none of it slowed him down. His voice continued to rise through the bustling markets. His message began touching the hearts of people who had never questioned the corruption around them. And for the elites, this was unacceptable. So they shifted to something far more dangerous: threats and secret plotting. Behind closed doors, powerful merchants and city leaders gathered to create a strategy. Their faces were tense, their pride was wounded, and their fear was growing. "What if he convinces more people?" one of them whispered. "What if the poor start demanding fairness?" Another asked, "What if this destroys our entire system?" Their solution was simple: silence him. They first tried social pressure. They warned families, "Do not let your children listen to Shu'aib. If you support him, you will lose your business connections." Then came the personal attacks. They approached Shu'aib's followers one by one, threatening to cancel their trade rights or deny them access to the marketplace. Many small traders were terrified. Some gave up out of fear, Others secretly stayed loyal to Shu'aib, but hid their faith in his message. When intimidation didn't work, the leaders confronted Shu'aib directly. They told him, "If you do not stop, we will banish you from our city." Others went further. "We will harm you if your preaching continues." To them, this was no longer a religious discussion, it was a defensive war. A war to protect their power, their wealth, and their crooked system. But Shu'aib stood firm. His voice didn't shake. His message didn't change. He reminded them that forcing him into silence wouldn't protect them from the consequences of injustice. He told them that threatening a prophet would only deepen their downfall. This angered them even more, and so the leaders created their final plan, a long-term plot to stop Shu'aib by isolating him, discrediting him publicly, and sabotaging anyone who dared support him. They believed that if they could make him look weak, the people would abandon him. But they didn't realize something powerful. Every threat only strengthened the truth. Every plot only exposed their fear. Every attempt to silence Shu'aib only made his message more urgent. Madyan was heading toward a turning point, and the next move would not be made by its leaders, but by the one who controls all outcomes. The day justice arrived, when the sky turned against Madyan. The warnings of Shu'aib echoed through the streets of Madyan for years. He pleaded with his people. He reasoned with the leaders. He reminded them gently, again and again, that no society built on fraud could escape the consequences of its own corruption. But Madyan had crossed a line where arrogance turns into rebellion, and rebellion invites justice. After rejecting every call to fairness, after threatening their prophet, and after mocking the truth with pride, the people of Madyan finally reached the moment they thought would never come. Divine punishment began silently. First, the weather changed. The cool winds that once brought comfort stopped blowing. The sky grew strangely still. The air became thick, heavy, and suffocating. People looked at one another with unease, but still, they ignored the signs. Then came the drought. Fields dried, wells shrank, animals weakened. The markets that once overflowed with goods now struggled to survive. The same people who prided themselves on wealth watched their riches crumble like dust between their fingers. Some whispered, maybe Shu'aib was right, but the leaders silenced them with anger. This is just bad luck, nothing more. But it wasn't luck. It was the first strike of warning. And then the final blow arrived. A dark cloud appeared on the horizon. The people rejoiced, thinking rain was coming to save them. They ran out into the open, lifting their hands in celebration. But this was not a cloud of mercy. It was a cloud of punishment. From within it came a roaring blast, a mighty, crushing shriek that no human ear could withstand. The sound tore through homes, shattered mountainsides, and struck the hearts of the people with terror they had never imagined. It wasn't just noise, it was judgment. The blast flattened the city in moments. Buildings collapsed, streets cracked open, and the people of Madyan, those who once laughed at honesty, fell silent forever. Only Shu'aib and the believers were saved. They left the city before the punishment fell, carrying with them the truth that Madyan rejected. When Shu'aib returned and saw the ruins, his voice trembled not with hatred, but sorrow. He said, I delivered the message of my Lord and advised you sincerely. Madyan had wealth, power, and influence. But they lost the one thing that keeps a society alive: justice. Modern parallels when ancient lessons meet today's economy. The story of Madyan isn't just an ancient warning, it's a mirror held up to the modern world. When we look closely, the patterns are shockingly familiar. The same fraud, the same greed, the same economic injustice that destroyed Madyan can be found in today's markets, corporations, and financial systems. And that's what makes Shu'aib's message timeless. Today, the tools have changed digital platforms, stock markets, global trade, but the temptations remain the same. Manipulating scales has evolved into manipulating data. Cheating customers has turned into hidden fees, false advertising, and predatory loans. Exploiting the poor now happens through unfair wages, unsafe working conditions, and systems designed to keep certain groups at the bottom. Just like Madyan, many modern economies celebrate profit more than integrity. Companies that cut corners are applauded for efficiency. Businesses that exploit workers are praised for competitiveness. Corporations that manipulate markets are seen as strategic. And all of this is packaged in polished language to hide the truth. Corruption is still corruption, even if it looks professional. Shu'aib's message reminds us that an economy isn't judged by its wealth. It's judged by its ethics. A society can have skyscrapers, billion-dollar companies, and booming markets, yet still be spiritually and morally bankrupt if honesty disappears from business. Because when dishonesty becomes normal, trust collapses. And when trust collapses, the entire economic structure begins to crack. The people of Madyan ignored small injustices until they became a culture. Today, the same danger exists. Price manipulation, corporate fraud, exploitation of weaker communities, unfair distribution of wealth. Systems designed to benefit the powerful at the cost of everyone else. These are not just economic issues, they are moral issues. They determine whether a society rises with dignity or collapses under its own corruption. Shu'aib's warnings teach us a powerful principle. If profit comes at the cost of justice, it is not profit, it is destruction with a delay. And history shows that delayed destruction eventually arrives. Modern societies still have time. They can choose transparency, fair trade, ethical business, honest wages, and accountability. They can choose to build economies that lift people up instead of breaking them down. But the question remains, will they learn from the past? Or will they repeat the mistakes of Madyan, a refuge of destiny? When Musa entered the land of Shu'aib after the destruction of Madyan, life in the surrounding regions continued to shift. Years later, in a moment written by destiny itself, the paths of two great prophets would cross Musa and Shu'aib. Their meeting wasn't random. It was a divine plan unfolding with perfect precision. Musa, fleeing from Egypt after unintentionally causing a man's death, was exhausted, hungry, and alone. He had escaped one danger, but had no idea where safety existed. His feet carried him through deserts until he arrived at a place historians believe was connected to the community of Shu'aib, a land of wells, shepherds, and humble people. This was Midian, the same region once scarred by corruption, now a place transformed by the legacy of Shu'aib. At the well, Musa saw a crowd of shepherds watering their flocks, and standing a short distance away were two women struggling to manage their animals. They were waiting because the men refused to let them draw water. Without hesitation, Musa stepped forward. He didn't ask for a reward. He didn't introduce himself. He simply did what righteous people do. He helped them. His strength moved the stone covering the well, and he drew water for them with kindness that came naturally to him. The women returned home amazed, telling their father about the noble stranger who helped them without asking anything in return. That father was Shu'aib, older now, wise, and living a life of humility after witnessing the rise and fall of his people. When Shu'aib heard about Musa, he knew this wasn't an ordinary traveler. He invited him into his home, offering protection and hospitality. Musa entered with humility, and the moment Shu'aib saw him, he recognized the signs of truth, sincerity, and divine purpose written on his face. Their meeting was a merging of destinies. One prophet near the end of his journey, the other at the beginning of a monumental mission. Shu'aib listened to Musa's story, comforted him, and assured him that he was now safe. Under Shu'aib's guidance, Musa found stability, work, and eventually, family. This refuge was not only physical, it was spiritual preparation for the mission ahead. Musa came seeking safety, but he found mentorship, growth, and the next chapter of his life. A fugitive became a shepherd became a leader, and a leader would soon become the liberator of an entire nation. The quiet years, how humility shaped a prophet. The years Musa spent in the land of Shu'aib were unlike anything he had experienced before. He had grown up in the royal palace of Egypt, surrounded by luxury, authority, and the constant weight of political power. But here, in this quiet land, life was simple, life was slow, and life was humbling. Shu'aib, now elderly but filled with wisdom, welcomed Musa not as a stranger, but as a man chosen by destiny. Under his roof, Musa learned lessons no palace could teach, lessons about patience, character, and what it meant to lead through humility rather than force. Musa worked as a shepherd. Day after day, he wandered through valleys and mountains, guiding sheep with gentle hands. This was not a downgrade from royalty, it was divine training. Shepherding teaches patience. It teaches responsibility. It teaches the value of protecting the weak and guiding those who cannot guide themselves. And every evening, when Musa returned with the flock, Shu'aib would speak to him not with authority, but with kindness. Strength means nothing without mercy, he would say. Leadership means nothing without humility. These weren't just words. They were seeds being planted in Musa's heart. The household itself was built on humility. The daughters of Shu'aib worked with sincerity and modesty. The food was simple, earned with honest hands. There was no arrogance, no greed, no competition for power. Everything reminded Musa of what a righteous community looked like, something he never saw in the oppressive world of Pharaoh. Years passed quietly, but every year refined Musa. Every challenge softened him. Every piece of advice from Shu'aib prepared him for the unimaginable mission that awaited him. During these humble years, Musa also learned about patience in relationships. He married one of Shu'aib's daughters and began a family of his own. He learned what it meant to build a home on trust, respect, and compassion. He understood the weight of responsibility not as a prince, but as a man grounded in reality. Most importantly, humility taught him clarity. He learned that true strength is not in raising one's voice, but in raising one's character, not in controlling people, but in controlling oneself. These years in Midian carved a new identity for Musa. Not the impulsive man who fled Egypt, but the calm, steady, disciplined soul who would one day stand before Pharaoh with unshakable courage. Humility didn't weaken Musa. It rebuilt him. The eternal legacy, justice that outlived a nation. When the dust of Madyan finally settled, when its ruins stood as silent witnesses to a nation's downfall, the story of Shu'aib didn't end there. His people were gone, but his message was not. Justice, honesty, and fairness, these values would echo far beyond the borders of Madyan, shaping the hearts of future prophets and entire civilizations. This was the legacy of Shu'aib. His mission wasn't only to warn a corrupt society, it was to establish a blueprint for ethical living that would survive long after those who rejected it had vanished. His teachings became part of a moral chain that connected prophets across generations. When Musa eventually left Midian to return to Egypt, he didn't just leave with a staff in his hand. He left carrying the wisdom, patience, and principles he learned from Shu'aib. Principles that would guide him through one of the greatest missions in human history. Shu'aib's message shaped Musa's leadership. It shaped how he confronted Pharaoh. It shaped how he guided the children of Israel. And it shaped how he embodied justice even when facing unimaginable resistance. This is the power of a righteous teacher. Their influence travels farther than their feet ever could. The lessons of Madyan also serve as an eternal reminder to the world. A society does not collapse because of poverty. It collapses because of injustice. Trade does not become corrupt because of competition. It becomes corrupt because of dishonesty. Nations do not fall because they lack wealth. They fall because they lack morality. Shu'aib's story teaches that justice isn't just a legal concept, it's a spiritual responsibility. Fair trade is worship. Honesty is worship. Protecting the weak is worship. And any economy built on exploitation is destined to crumble, no matter how powerful it appears. But his legacy isn't one of fear, it's one of hope. Because every time a business chooses transparency, every time a worker is paid fairly, every time a leader stands up for the truth, Shu'aib's message lives again. Justice is not a relic of the past. It is a living force, passed from prophet to prophet, generation to generation, heart to heart. Today, the ruins of Madyan still lie silent under desert winds. But the values taught by Shu'aib continue to rise, shaping communities, guiding believers, and reminding humanity that truth outlives corruption every single time.